The night air along the Nile was thick and warm, the kind of warmth that didn't leave even after the sun had gone. It clung to the skin and settled into the bones. Somewhere in the darkness, water moved slowly, brushing against the mud banks with a quiet, steady rhythm. If you listened closely, you could hear the distant splash of something alive slipping beneath the surface. Most people living 1,900 years ago knew that sound well. It was a warning. The Nile gave life, but also took it away. In a small village near the river's edge, a young linen worker named Tariq sat awake when he should have been sleeping. His hands still smelled faintly of dye and wet cloth. He had spent the entire day working under the burning sun, but tonight his mind refused to rest. Earlier that evening, a royal messenger had passed through the village. That alone was enough to make everyone stop and stare. Messengers didn't come here unless something important was happening. The messenger had said only a few words before moving on, but those words had stayed in Tariq's head. The queen walks under the protection of the crocodile. Some villagers whispered prayers when they heard it. Others crossed their arms and looked away, as if pretending they hadn't heard it all, because everyone knew who the queen was. She was Cleopatra VII. Even now, nearly 2,000 years later, her name still carries something heavy inside it. But back then, she was not just a name. She was a living presence, a ruler, a woman people feared, admired, and whispered about when the lamps were low. Tariq had never seen her. Most people never did, but they told stories. They said she could speak more languages than any scholar. They said powerful men crossed deserts and seas just to hear her voice. They said she could walk into a room and change the fate of nations without raising her hand. And lately, they said something else. They said she wore a cloak made from crocodile skin. Not just any cloak. A cloak that made her untouchable. The Nile, stretching endlessly through Egypt, had always been more than a river. It was a god, a road, a provider, and a threat. Crocodiles lived inside it, silent and patient. People feared them. They respected them. Some even worshipped them. To wear the skin of such a creature was not normal. It meant something. Tariq's grandfather used to tell him stories when he was a boy. They would sit together outside their mud brick home, watching the last light fade. The crocodile, his grandfather had said once, is not afraid of kings. Tariq remembered laughing. But the queen wears its skin, he had replied. His grandfather hadn't laughed back. That is why kings fear her. Now, sitting alone in the dark, Tariq wondered if those stories were true. Far away, in the city of Alexandria, the queen herself stood on a balcony overlooking the sea. Torches flickered behind her, their flames bending in the wind. Ships rested in the harbor below, their sails tied, their crews asleep. But Cleopatra was awake. She held the cloak in her hands. It was heavier than it looked. The scales caught the firelight, shining softly like wet stone. Each scale had once belonged to a creature that ruled the Nile without fear. She ran her fingers over it slowly. This cloak was not made for comfort. It was made for power. Behind her, footsteps approached. A servant stopped at a careful distance. "They are waiting," the servant said quietly. Cleopatra didn't turn. She already knew who they were. Men from the Roman Empire. Men who smiled while they planned. Men who spoke of friendship while measuring weakness. Men like Mark Antony. And before him, men like Julius Caesar. Rome was no longer just a distant power. It was a shadow creeping closer each day. Cleopatra lifted the cloak and placed it over her shoulders. Its weight settled onto her like a second skin. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Outside, waves crashed softly against the shore. Inside, history waited. Life 1,900 years ago was not quiet or peaceful. It was uncertain. Every day carried risk. Farmers woke before sunrise, unsure if the river would flood too much or too little. Mothers watched their children carefully, knowing sickness could come without warning. Workers like Tariq spent their lives making things they would never own. And above them all, rulers like Cleopatra lived in a world where trust could be more dangerous than war. The cloak had been made in secret. Hunters had traveled deep into the marshes along the Nile River. They had waited for days without moving, watching the water. When the crocodile finally appeared, it had come silently. It always did. They killed it quickly, not out of cruelty, out of fear, because even dead, the crocodile still seemed powerful. The skin was brought back to Alexandria. Craftsmen worked carefully, knowing this was no ordinary task. Every cut mattered. Every stitch mattered. They said the cloak would protect her. But from what? From blades? From betrayal? Or from something else entirely? Back in the village, Tarek lay down, but sleep didn't come. He stared at the ceiling. He imagined the queen standing somewhere far away, wearing the skin of the Nile's most feared creature. He wondered what it felt like. Did it make her feel safe? Or did it remind her of danger? He didn't know. He couldn't know. Because the truth about the cloak was something only a few people understood. And even they were afraid to speak of it. In Alexandria, Cleopatra stepped forward into the torchlight. Roman voices echoed in the hall ahead. She could hear them talking, laughing, waiting. She walked toward them slowly, the crocodile cloak moving with her. Each step carried the weight of a kingdom. Each step carried the weight of her fate. One of the Roman men turned as she entered. His smile faded when he saw the cloak. For just a moment, he said nothing. And in that moment, Cleopatra realized something important. The cloak was working, not because of magic, not because of superstition, but because of what people believed. Fear was its own kind of armor. She stopped in front of them. The room was silent now. No one looked away. No one spoke. Outside, the Nile continued to flow as it always had. Patient, watching, waiting, because the crocodile had not given up its power easily. And somewhere deep beneath the surface of history, there was a secret about that cloak. A secret that would change everything. But Cleopatra had not told anyone yet. And tonight, as the Roman general finally opened his mouth to speak, she wondered if she ever would. The Roman general did not speak right away. His eyes stayed on the cloak, moving slowly across the dark, patterned scales. He had faced armies before. He had walked through battlefields covered in dust and blood. But this was different. This was quieter, and somehow it unsettled him more. Cleopatra noticed. She had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than words. The torches crackled along the walls, and their light made the scales shimmer faintly. The cloak did not look soft. It did not look welcoming. It looked like something that belonged to the river, not to a person. "You honor us," the general finally said. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something careful. Cleopatra gave a small nod. "Rome honors itself by coming here," she replied. Her voice was steady, warm, controlled. She had spent years mastering that voice. Around them, servants stood motionless. No one interrupted. No one dared. Life 1,900 years ago often depended on moments like this. Moments where one wrong word could undo everything. Far away from palaces and marble floors, Tarek woke before sunrise. The sky was still dark blue, and the air was cooler than it would be later. He stepped outside and walked toward the river with the other workers. No one spoke much. They carried tools and baskets, their feet used to the familiar path. The Nile looked peaceful in the early light. Smooth, endless. It was easy to forget what lived beneath it. An older fisherman named Hadi stood near the bank, staring into the water. "You heard about the cloak," Hadi said quietly. It wasn't a question. Tarek nodded. Hadi spat into the river. "Things are changing," he said. Tarek frowned. "They always change," he replied. Hadi shook his head slowly. "No, not like this." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Everyone felt it. In Alexandria, the meeting continued. Wine was poured. Polite words were exchanged. Smiles appeared and disappeared. But the cloak stayed where it was, resting on Cleopatra's shoulders. The Roman general tried not to look at it again. He failed. He leaned forward slightly. "I have heard stories," he said. Cleopatra tilted her head. "Stories travel faster than ships," she said. He hesitated. "They say the crocodile is sacred." Cleopatra said nothing. Outside, beyond the palace walls, the sea stretched toward distant lands. Somewhere beyond that horizon, new rulers were rising. New powers were forming. One of those powers belonged to a man named Augustus. He was still far away, but not far enough. Cleopatra knew his name. She knew his ambition. And she knew ambition rarely stopped on its own. Inside the hall, the Roman general cleared his throat. "Do you believe it protects you?" he asked. It was a dangerous question, not because of the words, because of what they meant. Cleopatra looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "I believe," she said softly, "that people reveal themselves when they are afraid." The general leaned back. He did not smile. He understood her answer. In the village, Tarek worked beside his father, dipping cloth into dye. The water turned deep red, staining his hands. "Do you think she's afraid?" Tarek asked suddenly. His father did not look up. "Everyone is afraid," he said. "Even queens." His father paused. He thought for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Especially queens." Tarek watched the river. He tried to imagine her standing there, alone, wearing the skin of a creature no one could control. He wondered what she saw when she looked at the water. Did she see protection? Or did she see herself? Because crocodiles survive by waiting, by watching, by striking only when the moment was right. That night, back in the palace, Cleopatra stood alone again. The meeting was over. The Romans had gone, but their presence lingered. She walked slowly through a quiet hallway, her footsteps echoing softly. The cloak was still around her shoulders. She reached a small room lit by a single lamp. Inside, an old woman waited. Her name was Neferu. She had served Cleopatra since she was a child. Neferu's eyes moved immediately to the cloak. "You wore it," Neferu said. Cleopatra nodded. "Yes." Neferu stepped closer. "Do they believe?" she asked. Cleopatra did not answer right away. She looked down at the scales. "They believe something," she said. Neferu reached out, but stopped before touching it. "There are old stories," Neferu said quietly. Cleopatra looked at her. "Stories about the river," Neferu continued. "Stories about what it gives and what it takes." Cleopatra's expression did not change. She had heard those stories too. Stories of the ancient crocodile god, Sobek, who ruled the Nile's depths. Some believed wearing the skin brought strength. Others believed it brought something else. A connection, a reminder, a warning. Neferu lowered her voice. "You must be careful." Cleopatra met her eyes. "I'm always careful," she said. But later, when she was alone again, she removed the cloak slowly. Her shoulders felt lighter without it, but something else felt heavier. She placed it on a wooden stand. The scales caught the lamplight. For a moment, they almost looked alive. She stared at it, and she remembered something the hunters had told her, something they had whispered long after the cloak was finished. They had said the crocodile did not fight when they found it. It had only watched them, as if it already knew. Cleopatra turned away. Outside, the Nile moved through the darkness. Silent, endless, waiting, and far away, in his small home, Tarek slept at last. He dreamed of the river. He dreamed of golden eyes beneath the water, watching, not moving, not blinking, just waiting, waiting for something that had not happened yet. Morning came slowly to Alexandria, like it wasn't sure it wanted to arrive. The first light touched the tops of the palace columns, turning the pale stone gold. Birds circled above the harbor, their cries sharp and lonely in the cool air. Below them, fishermen were already awake, pulling in their nets, their hands stiff from sleep and salt. Inside the palace, Cleopatra had not slept. She sat near an open window, watching the sea breathe in and out. The crocodile-skin cloak rested across the room, exactly where she had left it. It seemed different in daylight, less mysterious, less powerful, but she knew that was an illusion. Power did not disappear with the sun. It only hid. A servant entered quietly and placed fresh bread and figs on a low table. The smell filled the room, warm and sweet. Cleopatra did not touch it. "Has there been word?" she asked. The servant lowered her head. "Only rumors, my queen." Cleopatra almost smiled. Rumors were never only rumors. They were warnings wearing softer clothes. Far across the sea, in the distant city of Rome, men were making decisions that would reach her sooner or later. She could feel it, the way a person feels a storm before the clouds appear. She stood and walked to the cloak. For a moment, she simply looked at it. She remembered the first time she had seen it finished. The craftsmen had laid it before her carefully, their hands trembling. No one spoke. They were waiting for her reaction. She had felt something then. Not fear, not pride. Something older. Something harder to name. She reached out now and touched one of the scales. It was cool, unmoving. But in her mind, she could still see the living creature it had come from. The slow, patient body. The unblinking eyes. She wondered what it had seen in its life. How many people had stood at the river's edge, unaware it was there? How many last moments had passed in its silent gaze? Outside the palace, life continued. Vendors shouted in the streets. Children ran barefoot through the dust. Donkeys carried heavy baskets, their heads low and tired. Life 1,900 years ago did not pause for queens. It moved forward always. In the village, Tariq walked with Hadi along the Nile's edge. The sun was higher now, and the heat was returning. Hadi carried a small knife at his side. Not for fighting. For comfort. You ever seen one? Tariq asked. Hadi knew what he meant. He nodded once. When I was younger. Tariq waited. Hadi's eyes stayed on the water. It was bigger than my boat, he said. It didn't move. Just floated there. Like a piece of the river itself. Tariq felt it chilled despite the heat. What did you do? Hadi gave a small laugh. I left. They walked in silence for a while. Then Hadi spoke again. They don't belong to us, he said. Tariq frowned. The crocodiles. He pointed to the river. This belongs to them. Tariq thought about the queen. About her wearing its skin. He didn't say anything, but the thought stayed with him. In Alexandria, Cleopatra stepped into a shaded courtyard. Palm trees swayed gently above her. The air smelled of water and stone. Nefer waited there. You sent for the scholars, Nefer said. Cleopatra nodded. They would come soon. There were questions she needed answered. Not about Rome. About the cloak. Because there was something no one else knew. Something the craftsman had told her in secret. The crocodile's body had been marked. Not by age. Not by injury. By something else. Symbols. Cut into the scales long before it had died. She had not understood them. Neither had the craftsman. But someone would. She needed to know what they meant. Because symbols were never placed without reason. And reason always carried consequence. Neferu studied her face. You were troubled. Cleopatra did not deny it. Everything has meaning, she said quietly. Neferu said nothing. She knew that tone. It meant Cleopatra had already decided something. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly. The sky was still clear. But storms often began that way. Slow, hidden, unstoppable. By evening, the scholars arrived. Old men with careful eyes and slow steps. They bowed deeply. Cleopatra showed them the cloak. One of them hesitated. You see something, Cleopatra said. The old man swallowed. Yes. He stepped closer. His fingers hovered above the scales. There are markings, he whispered. Cleopatra felt her chest tighten. You recognize them? The old man looked at her. His face had gone pale. Yes. The room felt suddenly smaller. What do they say? She asked. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than air. They are not decoration. Cleopatra waited. They are a warning. The word hung there. Heavy. Cold. Outside, the Nile flowed through the darkness, unchanged. In the village, Tariq sat beside his home, watching the stars. He did not know why, but he felt restless, like something was moving, something he could not see. Back in the palace, Cleopatra stared at the cloak. A warning. From what? From whom? The scholar stepped back. There are more, he said. Cleopatra's eyes sharpened. More what? He hesitated. More symbols, he said, hidden beneath the others. Cleopatra's heart began to beat faster, because hidden things were always the most dangerous. She stepped closer. The lamp flickered. The scales seemed to shift in the light. And for the first time since she had worn it, Cleopatra wondered if the cloak was protecting her, or protecting something else. The old scholar's hands trembled as he leaned closer to the cloak, his eyes tracing the faint lines carved into the hardened scales. He did not touch it. He seemed afraid to. The lamplight flickered again, and the shallow markings appeared and disappeared like something breathing. Cleopatra watched his face more than the cloak. You said they are hidden, she said quietly. The scholar nodded. Yes. Someone carved them. then try to cover them. But time brings truth back. Truth. The word felt heavier than it should have. Cleopatra had lived her life surrounded by truth and lies, so tightly woven together that even she sometimes could not see where one ended and the other began. "Who would do this?" she asked. The scholar hesitated. "I do not know who," he said, "but I know why." He stopped there. Cleopatra's voice stayed calm. "Tell me." He swallowed. In ancient belief, markings like these were not meant to give power. They were meant to contain it. The room went still. Outside, somewhere in the palace, a door closed softly. Contain it. The words did not leave her mind. Cleopatra turned her eyes back to the cloak. It looked no different than it had before. But now it felt different. Older. Not just the skin of an animal. Something that had carried a purpose long before it reached her hands. She dismissed the scholars soon after, but their words stayed behind. Neferu remained. "You should not keep it here tonight," Neferu said. Cleopatra did not answer. She knew Neferu was afraid. But fear had never been a stranger to her. She had been born into it. She had grown inside it. She walked to the open window and looked toward the distant line where the sea met the sky. Her family had ruled this land for generations, part of the Ptolemaic Kingdom. They had built temples, raised armies, and made promises to gods and men alike. But their rule had never been simple. Even as a child, Cleopatra had understood that thrones were not seats. They were tests. She remembered her father pacing late at night, whispering to advisors. She remembered the fear in his eyes when Rome's name was spoken. She had been young, but she had listened, and she had learned. Power was never permanent. It had to be held, protected, sometimes hidden. She turned back to the cloak. Perhaps that was what this was. Protection. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Far away, in the small village by the Nile, Tariq sat beside Hadi and listened to the old man speak. Hadi rarely told stories, but tonight he did. "When I was a boy," Hadi said, staring into the dark water, "there was a hunter who believed he could control the river." Tariq leaned closer. What happened to him? Hadi's expression did not change. He disappeared. Tariq frowned. "That's all." Hadi nodded. They found his boat days later. Empty. The river moved quietly beside them. Tariq felt his arms grow cold. "Do you think the crocodiles took him?" Hadi shrugged. "Maybe." He looked at Tariq then. Or maybe he took something that was not his. The words settled between them. Tariq looked at the water. He tried to imagine the hunter. Alone, certain, and then gone. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra stood alone again. The palace was quieter now. Most had gone to sleep. She walked slowly toward the cloak. Her hand hovered above it. She thought about the crocodile itself. The hunters had told her it was old, older than any they had seen. Its scales were thick and scarred, its eyes clear. It had survived longer than it should have. Why? She wished she had asked more questions. But at the time, she had only seen what it could become. A symbol, a message. Now she wondered what it had been before. She lowered her hand, stopped just before touching it. For the first time since it had been brought to her, she felt uncertain. Not of her power, but of its. Outside, clouds moved across the night sky, covering the stars. The air grew heavier. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again. Cleopatra stepped away. She told herself it was only a cloak. Nothing more. But deep inside, something disagreed. In a village, Tariq returned home and lay beside his sleeping brother. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about the queen, about the markings, about the hunter in Hadi's story. He did not know why it mattered to him. It should not have. His life was simple. Cloth, water, sun, sleep. But lately, the world felt larger and more dangerous, as if something had begun moving that could not be stopped. In Alexandria, Cleopatra finally lay down. But she did not sleep. Her eyes stayed open. Her mind replayed the scholar's words again and again. Not meant to give power, meant to contain it. She wondered who had carved those symbols, and why they had failed to keep them hidden. She wondered how long the cloak had existed before it reached her. Who had worn it? Who had feared it? Who had lost it? And why it had found its way to her now? The lamp burned low. The shadows deepened. Across the room, the cloak rested in silence. Waiting, the same way the river waited, the same way time waited. And somewhere beneath its hardened scales, beneath the faded markings and the careful stitches, a secret remained. A secret that had survived hunters, survived craftsmen, survived generations. And Cleopatra could not shake the feeling that it had survived for her. The next morning, the palace felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just watchful. Cleopatra noticed it in the way servants avoided looking at the cloak, in the way Neferu lingered longer than usual before leaving her alone. Even the air felt heavier, as if it carried something unseen from room to room. She had the cloak moved, not far, just to another chamber, a smaller one, older. It had once belonged to her father, back when his voice still filled the halls and his footsteps still echoed with certainty. The walls there were painted with faded images of the river, blue and green, worn by time. She stood in the doorway as two servants carried the cloak inside. They held it carefully like something fragile or dangerous. When they left, she remained, alone with it. She did not step closer. Instead, she studied the painted river on the wall. The Nile had always been the center of everything. Without it, there would be no farms, no cities, no kingdom, no throne. And yet, it could never be controlled, only respected. She remembered traveling south once, years ago, when she was still proving herself to those who doubted her. She had visited the great temple near the bend in the river, the one built to honor the crocodile god. Temple of Calm, Ombo. The memory returned clearly now. The heat had been unbearable that day. The stones beneath her feet had burned through her sandals. Priests had walked beside her, their voices calm and steady as they spoke of old beliefs. They had shown her carvings of crocodiles along the walls, not as monsters, as protectors, guardians of balance. One priest had told her something she had not forgotten. The crocodile lives in two worlds, he had said, water and land, life and death, stillness and motion. At the time, she had nodded politely. Now, the words meant something else. She turned her eyes back to the cloak. Two worlds. She wondered which world it belonged to now. In the village, Tarek woke from a dream he could not fully remember. Only pieces stayed with him. Dark water, a shape beneath the surface, eyes that did not blink. He sat up and rubbed his face. Outside, the day had already begun. His mother's voice carried through the small home. His brother laughed at something. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but the feeling from the dream stayed. He stepped outside and walked toward the river. Hadi was already there. He always was. "You look tired," Hadi said. "I dreamed," Tarek replied. Hadi nodded, as if that explained everything. They stood beside each other, watching the water. "Do you think a queen dreams?" Tarek asked suddenly. Hadi did not laugh. "Yes," he said, "but her dreams are heavier." Tarek did not understand completely, but he felt the truth in it. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra reached out at last and lifted part of the cloak. The scales shifted softly. It was heavier than linen, heavier than wool. It carried the weight of something that had lived its own life before becoming this. She turned it slightly. The hidden markings were there. Faint, uneven. Someone had carved them long ago. Someone who believed they mattered. She traced one of the lines with her eyes. It curved and bent in ways that did not look random. It looked like writing, but writing meant a message, and messages meant intent. She lowered the cloak. Her thoughts drifted to the hunter who had first taken it from the river. She had never met him. He had not come to the palace. He had taken his payment and disappeared back into the marsh. At the time, that had seemed normal. Now it did not. She wondered if he had known, if he had seen the markings, if he had understood them. And if he had, why had he said nothing? Outside, the harbor was alive with movement. Ships arrived carrying grain, stone, and news. News traveled faster than ships, but ships made it real. Some of that news spoke of Rome again, of shifting alliances, of men gaining power, of men losing it. Cleopatra understood those currents well. They were no different than the river. Unpredictable, unforgiving. She placed the cloak back onto the wooden stand. For a moment, she thought she saw something she had not noticed before. Near the edge, a deeper mark, almost hidden beneath a seam. She leaned closer. Her breath slowed. It was not like the others. It was older, rougher. and it formed a shape she recognized. Not from writing, from memory, from the temple. A symbol of watching, of waiting. She stepped back. Her heart beat faster now, not from fear, from realization, because symbols like that were not carved at the end. They were carved at the beginning. In the village, Tarek walked along the bank alone. He did not know why he had come, only that he needed to. The river moved slowly beside him. Calm, endless. He stopped when he saw something in the mud. A track, large. He stared at it. It could have been old, days old, or hours. He did not know. He looked out at the water. It gave nothing back, only its silence. Back in the palace, Cleopatra stood motionless. Her mind turned over the symbol again and again. If it had been carved first, then everything that came after had been built around it. Hidden it, covered it. Why? What had they been trying to hide? Or contain? The room felt smaller now, the air tighter. She realized something then. The cloak had not been made when the crocodile died. It had been prepared long before that, prepared while it was still alive. She did not know how she knew. She only knew she did. Outside, the wind rose slightly, brushing against the palace walls. The sea answered with its quiet roar. And in that moment, Cleopatra understood one simple, unsettling truth. The cloak had a history she did not control. And somewhere within that history, there was still something waiting. The symbol stayed in Cleopatra's mind long after she left the chamber. She walked through the palace halls without seeing them, her thoughts far away, turning over questions that had no easy answers. Servants bowed as she passed, but she barely noticed. Her feet carried her forward on their own, toward a place she had not visited in weeks. The quiet halls of the Library of Alexandria welcomed her with their familiar stillness. Here, the air always felt different, cooler, slower, as if time itself moved more carefully between the tall shelves and endless scrolls. An old keeper named Damon stood from his seat when he saw her. "My queen," he said softly. Cleopatra nodded. "I need to see the oldest records," she said. He did not ask why. He simply turned and led her deeper inside. They walked past rows of knowledge gathered over centuries. Words written by hands long gone. Thoughts preserved long after their owners had turned to dust. Life 1,900 years ago depended on memory, because memory was the only way to speak to the past. Damon stopped beside a sealed wooden chest. "These are rarely opened," he said. Cleopatra stepped forward. "Open them now." The lid creaked as it lifted. Inside, scrolls rested in careful order, their edges darkened with age. Damon hesitated. "You believe something has returned," he said quietly. Cleopatra looked at him. "Do you?" He did not answer. She reached down and lifted one scroll. The papyrus felt fragile beneath her fingers. She unrolled it slowly. Images appeared first. Drawings of the river, of crocodiles, of symbols. Her breath caught. There it was. The same shape she had seen on the cloak. Not exact, but close enough. She felt the room grow colder. "What does it mean?" she asked. Damon leaned closer. His eyes narrowed. "I have seen this only once before," he said. He looked at her carefully. "In a story older than this kingdom." Cleopatra's grip tightened slightly. "Tell me." Damon hesitated. "It was said," he began slowly, "that some creatures were chosen." "Chosen?" she repeated. He nodded. "Marked, not by men, but by belief." Cleopatra said nothing. She let him continue. They were watched, protected, and when their time ended, their remains were never meant to be worn. The words settled heavily between them. Cleopatra lowered her eyes to the drawing again. Never meant to be worn, but she had worn it. She had stood before Rome wearing it. She had felt its weight on her shoulders. And now, she could not forget that feeling. In the village, Tarek returned to the riverbank before sunset. He had not told anyone about the track he had seen, not even Hadi. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because saying it aloud would make it real. He stood at the same place. The mud had dried slightly, but the shape was still there. Large, clear. He crouched beside it. His heart beat faster. He told himself it was old, that it meant nothing. But he did not believe it. He stared at the water. The surface reflected the sky perfectly. Peaceful, empty. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something beneath it knew he was there. Watching, waiting. He stood quickly and stepped back. He felt foolish, but he did not step forward again. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra dismissed Damon and carried the memory of the symbol with her. Night came again, and with it, uncertainty. She returned to the chamber where the cloak rested. She lit a lamp. The flame flickered softly. The cloak did not move, but did not feel lifeless either. She stepped closer. Her mind replayed Damon's words. Chosen, protected, never meant to be worn. She reached out. Her fingers stopped just short of touching it. She remembered the first time she had placed it on her shoulders. The way the Roman general had looked at her. The way his confidence had shifted. It had given her an advantage. That was real. That was power. But now she wondered if she had misunderstood whose power it was. Outside, the sea wind pressed against the palace walls. Inside, the lamp flame bent and straightened. Cleopatra finally let her fingers rest on the scales. They were cold, unchanging, yet her pulse quickened. She could not explain why. In another part of the palace, Neferu spoke quietly with a palace guard. "You have seen it?" she asked. The guard nodded. "Only once." And he hesitated. "It feels wrong to look at." Neferu closed her eyes briefly. She had feared that answer, not because of what it meant, but because of what it might mean later. Back at the river, night settled over Tariq's village. He lay awake again. Sleep would not come. He kept seeing the track. He kept feeling that unseen gaze. His brother turned beside him. "Why are you awake?" his brother whispered. Tariq hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. Because he didn't. He only knew something had changed. Not in the village. Not in the river. Somewhere else. Somewhere far away. In the palace, Cleopatra stood alone with the cloak. She slowly lifted it again. The weight settled into her hands. Familiar. Unfamiliar. She thought about Rome. About power. About fear. She thought about symbols carved before her lifetime. Symbols meant to contain something. She wondered what would happen if containment failed. Her eyes moved once more to the deeper mark near the seam. The oldest mark. The first mark. She realized something else then. The mark faced inward. Not outward. Not meant to be seen by others. Meant to be seen by the one who wore it. She felt her breath catch, as if the message had always been waiting for her alone. Outside, far beyond the palace, beyond the city, beyond the farms and villages, the Nile flowed through the darkness. Unchanged, endless, carrying secrets from one generation to the next. And somewhere within those secrets, the truth about the crocodile-skin cloak was still unfolding. Not finished. Not understood. Not yet. Cleopatra did not put the cloak on. She held it in her hands for a long time, feeling its weight, studying the inward-facing mark. The lamplight trembled across the scales, and for a moment she imagined it was breathing. She knew that was impossible, and yet she could not shake the feeling that it was aware. She lowered it carefully back onto the stand. Her reflection caught her eye in a bronze mirror nearby. She looked calm, composed, every inch a queen, but inside something had shifted. Cleopatra VII had built her life on understanding symbols. Crowns, thrones, titles. Each one meant something beyond itself. Each one shaped how others saw her. This cloak was no different. Except this time, she did not know if she was the one shaping the symbol, or if the symbol was shaping her. She stepped away. Outside, Alexandria did not sleep. The harbor fires burned bright. Sailors shouted across the docks. Somewhere, music drifted through the night air, soft and distant. Life went on. It always did. But Cleopatra knew life could change in a single moment. She had seen it before. She walked onto the balcony and looked toward the dark line of the Nile River far beyond the city. Everything came from that river. Food, trade, power, and now, perhaps, this mystery. In the village, Tariq sat beside Hadi's small fire. The old man was quiet tonight, more quiet than usual. "You saw something?" Hadi said suddenly. Tariq stiffened. He had not told him, but Hadi had always known things without being told. Tariq nodded slowly. A track. Hadi's face did not change. "Where?" "Near the bend." Hadi stared into the fire. "That place again," he murmured. Tarek frowned. What do you mean? Hadi hesitated. Then he spoke. When I was young, my father warned me about that bend. He said some parts of the river remember more than others. Tarek did not understand. Remember what? Hadi shook his head. I don't know. The fire cracked softly. Hadi looked at him then. You stay away from it. It was not a suggestion. It was a warning. Back in the palace, Neferu stood outside the chamber where the cloak rested. She had not gone inside. She did not want to, but she felt responsible. She had helped raise Cleopatra. She had watched her grow from a curious child into a ruler feared by distant nations. And now she feared something she could not see. She whispered a small prayer. Not to any one god. To all of them. Just in case. Inside the chamber, the cloak remained still. Silent. Patient. Cleopatra returned hours later. Sleep had not come. She lit the lamp again. The same soft glow filled the room. She walked directly to the cloak. This time, she did not hesitate. She lifted it. Slowly. Carefully. She turned it over in her hands. The inward symbol faced her. Watching her, she remembered Damon's words. Chosen. The word echoed. She wondered if choice went both ways. If she had chosen the cloak, or if it had chosen her. She thought about Rome again. About the way the general had looked at her. About how his certainty had faltered. That had been real. Whatever this cloak was, it had given her something. An advantage she could not ignore. A queen could not afford to ignore anything. Outside, clouds covered the moon. The city dimmed. The world felt smaller. More fragile. Far away, at the river bend, Tarek stood alone again. He had told himself he would not return. But he had. The water was dark. The air heavy. He stared at the place where he had seen the track. It was gone now. Erased by time. Or by the river. He felt foolish for coming. He turned to leave. Then he heard it. A sound. Soft. A shift in the water. He froze. His heart pounded. He told himself it was a fish. Nothing more. But he did not move. He could not. The surface of the water stilled again. Perfectly calm. Too calm. He stepped back slowly. He did not run. Not yet. In Alexandria, Cleopatra closed her eyes. Just for a moment. She imagined a river. The crocodile. The markings carved into its skin while it still lived. Why carve a warning into something alive? Unless it was meant to carry it forward. To bring it somewhere. To someone. Her eyes opened. She looked down at the cloak in her hands. A thought came to her then. Quiet. Unwelcome. What if the cloak had not been made to protect Egypt? What if it had been made to protect the river? She felt a chill. Because she knew what Rome wanted. Control. Of Egypt. Of the Nile. Of everything. She lowered the cloak again. Her fingers lingered on the scales. She realized she did not know if wearing it brought her closer to power. Or closer to something else entirely. Something older. Something patient. At the river bend, Tarek finally turned away. He walked quickly now, his breathing uneven. He did not look back, but he felt it. That feeling. The feeling of being watched. Back in the palace, Cleopatra stepped away from the cloak once more. She left it where it rested. She did not put it on. Not tonight. But she knew she would again. Because whatever it was now part of her story. And somewhere, deep within its ancient scales, the cloak was still waiting. Not for the past. For what would happen next. The next day arrived under a sky that felt too low. Even the light over Alexandria seemed thinner. As if the sun itself was holding something back. People moved through the streets as they always did, carrying baskets, calling out prices, arguing over small things. But beneath the noise, there was a quiet tension. The kind no one spoke about. The kind everyone felt. Inside the palace, Cleopatra stood before a group of Roman messengers. They had arrived without warning. Their clothes carried the dust of travel. Their faces carried the calm confidence of men who believed the world was already theirs. One of them stepped forward. He bowed, but not deeply. Rome sends its respect, he said. His voice was smooth. Practiced. Cleopatra held his gaze. And what else does Rome send? She asked. He hesitated. Only for a moment. A request. The word lingered in the air. Cleopatra did not move. What kind of request? The messenger's eyes flickered, just briefly, toward the doorway behind her. Toward the inner chambers. Rome wishes to understand Egypt's symbols, he said carefully. Cleopatra felt something tighten inside her. They knew. Not everything, but enough. She kept her voice calm. Egypt has many symbols. The messenger nodded. Yes, he said, but some have drawn particular attention. He did not say the word cloak. He did not need to. Cleopatra dismissed them soon after. But their presence remained. Rome was watching. Not just her. The cloak. In the quiet chamber, the crocodile-skin cloak rested where she had left it. Unchanged. Waiting. She stepped inside. Closed the door behind her. The room felt smaller than before. She walked toward it slowly. Her thoughts were louder now. Rome wanted control. Of Egypt. Of the Nile River. Of her. She reached out. Paused. She remembered the symbol facing inward. The symbol meant for the wearer. A warning. Or a message. She lifted the cloak. Its weight settled into her arms. Familiar. Heavy. Final. Far to the south at the bend in the river, Tariq ran. He did not know why he was running. Only that he could not stop. He had gone back again that morning. He had told himself he would only look. Only for a moment. But the river had not looked the same. The water had been disturbed. Mud broken. Fresh. Recent. He had stood there frozen. And then he had seen it. Not the creature itself, but the shape beneath the surface. Large. Still. Watching. He had stepped back slowly. Carefully. The shape had not moved. But he knew it was there. He ran now toward the village, his breath burning in his chest. He did not want to see it again, but he knew he would never forget it. Back in Alexandria, Neferu stood in the doorway. You should not wear it today, she said quietly. Cleopatra did not turn. Rome is asking questions, Neferu continued. Cleopatra's fingers tightened slightly on the cloak. That is why I must wear it, she said. Neferu's voice trembled. You do not know what it is. Cleopatra turned then. Her eyes were calm, but something deeper moved behind them. No, she said softly, but they do not know either. Neferu had no answer. Cleopatra lifted the cloak. She placed it over her shoulders. The scales settled against her skin. Cool, unforgiving. For a moment, nothing happened. Nothing changed. And yet everything felt different. She straightened. She felt taller. Heavier. Seen. In the village, Tariq reached Hadi's home. Hadi, he gasped. The old man looked up immediately. You saw it, Hadi said. It was not a question. Tariq nodded. Hadi closed his eyes briefly. As I feared. Tariq's voice shook. It's still there. Hadi stared toward the distant river. Yes, he said quietly. His voice carried something new. Not surprise. Not fear. Recognition. In the palace, Cleopatra walked through the main hall wearing the cloak. Servants stopped. Guards lowered their eyes. No one spoke. She could feel their attention, their uncertainty, their belief. She stepped onto the balcony. The sea stretched endlessly before her. Somewhere beyond it, Rome waited, watching, judging, preparing. She wondered if they understood what they were truly seeing, if she understood it herself. Behind her, unseen, the inward symbol rested against her back. Hidden, waiting. At the river bend, the water moved again, slowly, deliberately, as if something beneath it had made a decision. In the palace, a new messenger arrived. Breathless, urgent. He fell to one knee. My queen, he said. Cleopatra turned. There is news. She waited. The messenger swallowed. Rome is sending someone. Cleopatra's expression did not change. Ooh. The messenger hesitated. His voice dropped. A ruler. Silence filled the hall. Because this was no longer a message. It was a warning. Far away, the river darkened under gathering clouds. Tariq stood at its edge once more. He did not know why he had come back, only that he had to see. The surface was calm, perfect, empty, but he knew better now. He stood frozen, waiting. In Alexandria, Cleopatra stood unmoving beneath the weight of the cloak. Rome was coming. The river was changing. The symbols were waking. And somewhere between the throne and the water, between power and warning, between belief and truth, something had begun that could no longer be stopped. The palace did not breathe the same way after that. Word spread quietly, the way dangerous news always did. Rome was not just watching now. Rome was coming. Cleopatra stood alone in her private chamber, the crocodile-skin cloak still around her shoulders. She had not taken it off. Hours had passed, yet she barely noticed the weight anymore. It felt less like something she wore and more like something that had settled into place. Outside, the sky had turned the color of dull bronze. A storm was building somewhere beyond the sea. She walked slowly to the window. Alexandria stretched before her, alive and fragile at the same time. This city was her heart, its streets, its harbor, its people, and beneath it all, the steady pulse of the Nile River. She placed her hand lightly against the scales near her arm. They were warmer now, or perhaps her skin had grown colder. She could not tell. Behind her, Neferu entered quietly. "The ships have been sighted," she said. Cleopatra did not turn. "How many?" "Enough." That was all Neferu said. It was enough. Cleopatra closed her eyes briefly. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, though she had never known its exact shape. Power never arrived with warning bells. It arrived with footsteps. Soft, certain, unstoppable. Far to the south, Tariq stood beside Hadi again. Neither of them spoke. The river was restless today. The surface broke and reformed in slow patterns, as if something beneath it shifted its weight. Hadi's old hands tightened on his walking stick. "It has woken," he said quietly. Tariq felt his throat tighten. "What does it want?" Hadi did not answer, because some questions did not have answers anyone wanted to hear. In Alexandria, servants whispered in corners. They spoke of Rome. They spoke of Cleopatra. And they spoke of the cloak. Some said it protected her. Others said it protected Egypt itself. Others still said nothing at all, because there was something about it that made words feel dangerous. Cleopatra walked through the palace halls again. Every step echoed. Every movement watched. She could feel their eyes, their hope, their fear. She stepped into the great throne room. The massive stone pillars rose around her like silent witnesses. She stopped at the center. For a moment, she remembered herself as a child here. Small, quiet, watching her father sit where she now stood. She remembered how distant he had seemed, how powerful. Now she understood the truth. Power was not distance. Power was isolation. She was alone now, even surrounded by thousands. Her fingers brushed the inward symbol again. Still hidden, still waiting. At the river bend, Tariq saw it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. The shape beneath the water moved. Slow, massive, ancient. He froze. Every instinct told him to run, but he could not move. The surface broke slightly. Just enough for him to see the eyes. They were calm, unblinking. They did not look like the eyes of something hunting. They looked like the eyes of something remembering. Tariq stepped back. His foot slipped in the mud. The sound echoed louder than it should have. The eyes did not leave him. He turned and ran. Behind him, the river closed again. Silent. In the palace, a horn sounded from the harbor. Low, long, final. Neferu appeared in the doorway. "They have arrived," she said. Cleopatra had nodded once. Her heart did not race. Her breath did not quicken. But something deeper inside her shifted. This was the moment everything had been moving toward. She walked forward. The cloak moved with her, each scale catching the fading light, each step carrying history with it. Outside, the harbor was filled with Roman ships, their sails dark against the horizon, their presence undeniable. Men gathered along the shore, watching, waiting. Cleopatra stepped onto the palace balcony. Far below, the city held its breath. She lifted her chin. She let them see her. Let Rome see her. Let the river see her. The wind rose suddenly. Strong, warm. It pressed against the cloak. The scales shifted softly. For just a moment, Cleopatra felt something she could not explain. Not fear, not strength, recognition. Far away, Tariq collapsed onto the ground outside his home. His chest burned. His hands shook. Hadi appeared beside him. "You saw." Tariq nodded weakly. Hadi looked toward the river. His face carried no surprise now, only certainty. "It has been waiting," Hadi said. In Alexandria, a single Roman figure stepped off the ship. Even from the balcony, Cleopatra could see the way he moved. Calm, certain. He did not look up at her yet. He simply walked forward, as if he already knew she was there, as if he already knew what she wore. The wind pressed harder against her. The inward symbol rested cold against her back, hidden from the world, but not from her. Below, the Roman figure stopped. Slowly, he lifted his head, and in that moment, across the distance, across the harbor, across the weight of history itself, Cleopatra felt something shift. Not in the city, not in Rome, not even in the river, but in the silence between them. And she realized, with sudden and terrifying clarity, this was no longer about the cloak. This was about what it had been waiting to see. The man from Rome did not rush. That was the first thing Cleopatra noticed. He walked as if time belonged to him, as if every step had already been decided long before his feet touched Egyptian ground. The harbor seemed smaller around him. The noise of the city faded. Even the wind felt like it had paused to watch. Cleopatra stood perfectly still on the balcony, the crocodile-skin cloak resting on her shoulders like a second skin. She could feel its weight more clearly now. Not heavier, just more present. The Roman stopped at the center of the harbor. Slowly, deliberately, he looked up. Their eyes met. And in that instant, Cleopatra understood who he was. Julius Caesar. His name had traveled ahead of him for years. Through battles, through victories, through whispers of ambition that reached every corner of the known world. He did not bow. He simply watched her. His expression revealed nothing. But his eyes lingered on the cloak. Not her crown, not her face. The cloak. Cleopatra felt a faint chill move through her. He knew, or at least he believed he knew. Behind her, Neferu whispered, "He looks at you as if he already understands." Cleopatra did not answer, because she was no longer sure what there was to understand. Far to the south, Tariq sat beside Hadi in silence. His breathing had finally slowed, but his hands still trembled. "It saw me," Tariq said. Hadi nodded faintly. "Yes." Tariq swallowed. "It did not chase me." Hadi's eyes remained on the river. "It did not need to." The words hung heavily between them. Tariq did not know why that frightened him more. In Alexandria, Caesar began walking toward the palace. Each step echoed against stone. Each step carried purpose. Crowds gathered at a distance, watching him pass. No one spoke to him. No one stopped him. It was as if they understood that he moved inside his own world. Inside the palace, Cleopatra turned away from the balcony. "He will be here soon," Neferu said. "Yes." Cleopatra's voice was calm, but inside her, thoughts moved like the river during flood season. Fast, unpredictable, dangerous. She reached back slightly, her fingers brushing the inward symbol beneath the cloak. Still there, still hidden, still waiting. She wondered if Caesar would recognize it. She wondered if he already had. Servants rushed quietly through the halls, lighting torches, preparing for his arrival. But Cleopatra did not move to the throne. She remained standing, waiting, not as someone receiving a guest, but as someone meeting an equal, or an enemy. At the river bend, the water shifted again. Hadi watched carefully. His old eyes saw what others could not. Patterns, cycles, returns. "It is restless," he murmured. Tariq followed his gaze. The surface rippled in widening circles. "It feels him," Hadi added. Tariq frowned. "Feels who?" Hadi did not answer, because even he was no longer certain. In the palace, the sound of footsteps approached. Closer, closer, each one steady, unwavering. Cleopatra's heartbeat slowed. Not faster, slower, as if her body understood something her mind did not. The doors opened. Caesar entered. He did not wear a crown. He did not need one. Power followed him without symbols. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another. Two rulers, two futures, two uncertainties. His gaze moved again to the cloak. He tilted his head slightly. Curious, interested, careful. "You honor Rome with your welcome," he said at last. His voice was calm, measured. Cleopatra answered just as calmly. "Egypt honors those who arrive in peace." A faint smile touched his lips. "Peace," he repeated, as if testing the word, as if weighing it. His eyes returned to the cloak. "You were something unusual." Cleopatra felt the scales press faintly against her skin. "Yes." He stepped closer, not too close, but close enough. "The crocodile," he said softly. Not a question, A recognition. Cleopatra did not confirm it. She did not deny it. She simply watched him. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sky. Far away, but coming closer. At the river, Tariq stood suddenly. The water had broken again. Not violently, but deliberately, as if something beneath it had risen slightly, acknowledging something far away, acknowledging something it had been waiting for. Back in the palace, Caesar's eyes met Cleopatra's again. There was something different in his expression now. Not certainty, not confidence. Something else. Something quieter. Something cautious. "You believe in symbols," he said. Cleopatra answered carefully. "I believe in what symbols do." The silence between them deepened. Heavy. Unfinished. The wind outside rose sharply, rattling the palace torches. The cloak shifted against her. The hidden mark pressed against her back. And for the first time since Caesar entered, Cleopatra felt it clearly. Not weight, not warmth, pressure, as if something within its ancient scales had finally awakened completely, as if something had been waiting not for her, but for him. Caesar took one final step forward, close enough now to see every detail, close enough to reach out. But he did not, because something in his eyes had changed, something uncertain, something wary. And Cleopatra realized, with a sudden, breath-stealing clarity, that whatever power stood between them now, neither of them truly controlled it. Cleopatra stood perfectly still, the cloak heavy on her shoulders, every scale pressing against her like a heartbeat. She felt it move subtly, not on its own, not exactly, but as if the memory of the creature from which it had been taken was stirring beneath her skin. Caesar's eyes remained locked on her, but now there was hesitation there. A pause, a question he could not yet name. Outside, the palace seemed to shrink. Even the air smelled different, as if the approaching storm carried with it something older than the city, older than even the river itself. The Nile had always been a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to every ruler, every battle, every ambition. Cleopatra felt it in the room with her, in the quiet spaces between herself and Caesar. It was alive with the weight of memory. "You are something ancient," Caesar said finally. His voice was softer now, measured, something that commands more than just your presence. Cleopatra let the words settle. She did not answer. It was true. The cloak had commanded attention long before she had stepped into it. It had held secrets, hidden warnings, and the faint pulse of something more, something that had been waiting. She shifted slightly, the scales whispering against one another. The inward symbol pressed lightly against her back, and for the first time, she thought she could feel its meaning more clearly. Not just a warning, not just a protection. It was a marker, a memory, a presence, something that survived its own death. Far to the south, Tariq stumbled through the brush along the riverbank. The water behind him swirled, restless, as if it had been disturbed by a presence too old and too patient to be ignored. He did not stop. He did not look back. But he felt it, the same unseen gaze he had seen before, the one that made his chest tighten and his hands tremble. Something had awakened, and it knew he was near. Hadi followed slowly, his eyes scanning the water. "It is not hunting," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It is waiting." Tariq's pulse raced. Waiting for what? Hadi shook his head. "That is the question, and it is not ours to answer. Only to survive." Back in the palace, Cleopatra's gaze moved over Caesar again. He was no longer merely a man of Rome. He was a symbol of conquest, of ambition, of power stretching across seas and lands. But now, standing before her, he seemed smaller, not weak, but measured against something he did not understand, against something older than both of them. The wind picked up outside, rattling the torches along the balcony. Cleopatra could feel it pressing against the cloak, making the scales shift and whisper softly. She realized she was holding her breath. The weight of the cloak was no longer just physical. It carried expectation, history, and a presence she had only begun to understand. "You feel it too," she said quietly, almost to herself. Caesar's eyes flickered. For a moment, the confident mask he always wore faltered. Feel what? He asked. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. That this is not simply a cloak. It is alive with memory, with purpose. It waits, and it chooses what it reveals. He stepped closer, cautious, and for the first time, Cleopatra felt the tension of all that history, all that power pressing in between them. The cloak had never been meant to be worn. It had been meant to be preserved, to carry a warning forward through time. And now it was here, on her shoulders, between two rulers who knew nothing of what lay beneath its scales. Outside the palace, the wind became a howl. The storm had arrived. Rain began to lash against the walls, the river swelling quietly but with intent. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, and the sound seemed to echo through the halls, vibrating against stone. Tarek stumbled again along the riverbank. His eyes widened as the water moved faster now, patterns breaking across its surface. He felt the weight of it, the presence below. It was watching, waiting, anticipating, not in anger, not in malice, but in purpose. It knew something was about to happen, something that could not be undone. Hadi's eyes were narrowed. It has recognized the shift, he murmured. The presence has moved beyond patience. It knows the moment has arrived. Tarek shivered. What moment? Hadi did not answer. He simply placed a hand on Tarek's shoulder, steadying him. Be ready, he said, because what comes next is not something you can run from. In Alexandria, Cleopatra finally lifted her head higher, letting the cloak settle fully on her shoulders. She felt the weight of the symbol pressing against her back, and she understood with sudden clarity. This was no longer about politics, about Rome, about Egypt. This was something older, something deeper, something that could shift the balance of power entirely. Caesar's voice broke the silence again. You are not just a queen, are you? No, she said softly. I am more. And this, she gestured slightly to the cloak, is not mine alone. He studied her, his eyes flicking to the scales, to the way they caught the stormlight, to the inward symbol hidden from the world. He knew, instinctively, that this was not a garment of fashion or pride. It carried intent, and intent could not be bargained with. The wind outside tore open the doors for a moment, letting a blast of rain and cold into the chamber. Cleopatra felt the cloak shift against her skin, and it seemed to pulse, alive with anticipation. The symbol at her back pressed lightly, insistently. She realized that it was not waiting for her. It was waiting for him. Tarek and Hadi watched the river bend from the shadows. The surface broke again, revealing glimpses of dark, ancient shapes beneath the water. The air was heavy, charged with expectation. Tarek could feel it vibrating through his bones, and he understood now that the river itself was not neutral. It was part of this awakening, part of the history that had traveled with the cloak. In the palace, Caesar took a cautious step forward. Every instinct in Cleopatra's body screamed at her to pause, to test him, to wait. But she knew there was no testing here. The cloak had already begun its work. Its presence was a current, invisible but undeniable, carrying with it centuries of memory, of warning, of vigilance. You know, Caesar said, his voice lower now, more deliberate, that you could bend Rome with a single command. Cleopatra's lips curved slightly, but the cloak shifted again, heavier now, pressing insistently against her back. She understood then that command was not entirely hers, that something else, something that had survived death itself, was shaping the moment as much as she was. The torches along the balcony guttered. The rain hammered harder. Somewhere in the city, a bell tolled, carried over the rooftops. The storm seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, with the pulse of the river, with the quiet movements of the unseen watchers below. Caesar's hand hovered slightly, as if to reach out, to assert, to claim. But he did not. He could feel it too. The power in the cloak, in the symbol, in the very air around Cleopatra. It was old, patient, unyielding, not something a man, however powerful, could control. Cleopatra's mind moved quickly. She thought of the hunter who had first taken the crocodile. She thought of the carvings hidden in the scales. She thought of Tarek in the river bend, and she realized that this moment had been set in motion long before either Caesar or she had arrived. That the cloak had been waiting for centuries for this convergence, for the day when two rulers would meet beneath its silent vigilance. The storm reached its peak. Rain lashed against the palace walls. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle the windows. Cleopatra felt the tension tighten inside her, not of fear, but of inevitability. The cloak pressed against her, alive with memory, waiting. Caesar's gaze met hers again. He understood, in some instinctive way, that what he saw was not just a queen or a garment, but a threshold. Tarek's voice echoed in her memory, though he was hundreds of miles away. The river moved beneath him, restless and powerful. Hadi's hand had pressed against his shoulder. Be ready. Cleopatra understood now that she too had to be ready. The cloak would not reveal its full intent yet. It would not speak or act, but its presence demanded recognition, obedience, awareness. Caesar's voice, quieter now, reached her over the storm. I see it. Yes, Cleopatra replied. Her fingers rested lightly on the scales. And now, so do you. The storm cracked open one final time, a deafening strike of thunder that seemed to shake the palace to its foundations. The cloak shifted sharply, almost moving of its own accord. The inward symbol pressed fully, insistently, against her back. It was no longer hidden. It was awake. It was ready. And Cleopatra knew, in that instant, that nothing would ever be the same. The river, the storm, the cloak, the symbol, they were converging. Not just on her, or on Caesar, or even on Egypt, but on the fate that had been waiting to unfold for centuries. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Caesar stepped closer, his hand still hovering. The storm raged. The torches flickered. The river moved in its unseen depths. And somewhere beneath all of it, the ancient, silent power within the crocodile-skin cloak began its final stirring. The moment was poised on the edge of history, and no one, neither Cleopatra, nor Caesar, nor even Tarek far to the south, knew which way it would fall. The storm did not let up. Lightning split the sky over Alexandria, casting jagged shadows across the palace walls, while rain poured down in sheets that blurred the line between the city and the Nile. Cleopatra felt the cloak press heavier against her shoulders, the scales whispering in a language she could no longer ignore. It was as if it recognized something beyond Caesar's presence, something older, deeper, and far more dangerous. Caesar's eyes were locked on her, but now there was a flicker of doubt, subtle and almost imperceptible. He had come expecting to meet a queen who commanded loyalty with her voice, her cunning, her charm. What he did not anticipate was this: a living symbol of ancient power, a presence that belonged neither to him nor to Cleopatra, moving between them like a shadow. Then it happened. A sudden tremor ran through the palace floors. The torches along the balcony guttered violently. Cleopatra staggered slightly, gripping the edges of the cloak, as if it might lift her into the air. Caesar reached out instinctively, but she did not flinch. She was rooted, as if the cloak itself had planted her there, anchored her to this precise moment. The walls of the throne room shuddered again. Servants screamed and ran for cover. Neferu's eyes widened in alarm. "It's not the storm," she shouted over the roar of the wind. "Something beneath us." Cleopatra's gaze swept the room, then the balcony, then the city beyond. The river seemed to darken unnaturally, as if the storm had stirred not only the clouds, but something lurking in its depths. And then she saw it, a ripple moving across the Nile that was too large, too deliberate to be caused by the wind. Something massive, alive, was rising from the river, its movements synchronized with the tremors under the palace. Tarek, far to the south, froze mid-step. The river's surface had exploded into patterns he had never seen before, vortices spinning violently, revealing glimpses of immense shapes moving beneath. His heart pounded. "It's coming," he whispered to Hadi. "It knows." Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra turned to Caesar. "This cloak," she began, her voice steady but urgent. "It's not just a symbol of power. It's a key, and it has awakened something, something that neither of us can control alone. Caesar's expression hardened. A key, he repeated. To what? Before she could answer, the palace trembled again, more violently. Dust and small stones fell from the ceiling. The balcony railing cracked under the pressure of the wind. And then, as if the storm had reached its crescendo, the scales of the crocodile-skin cloak shimmered unnaturally, reflecting lightning in patterns that made Cleopatra's skin prickle with recognition. The inward symbol, long hidden, seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Nephra gasped. "It's communicating," she said, her voice trembling. "It's warning, or it's calling." Cleopatra's mind raced. The cloak had chosen her. It had protected her. But now, it seemed to demand more. She realized with sudden clarity that whatever force had been waiting beneath the river, whatever ancient presence had lent the cloak its power, was no longer content to remain dormant. Then Caesar's gaze shifted. He had spotted movement beyond the palace walls. Soldiers and citizens were fleeing toward the harbor, screaming, pointing toward the Nile. A massive shadow rose from the water, larger than any crocodile or ship, and for the first time, Cleopatra saw its true form. Scales glinting under the storm, eyes glowing with intelligence, teeth sharp and relentless. She felt the cloak shift violently against her back, almost as if it were reacting to the creature. She realized, with a sudden jolt of fear and awe, that the cloak had never been just a garment. It had been a seal, a warning, and now, for the first time in centuries, that seal was breaking. Tarek stumbled backward as the river erupted. The water surged with unnatural strength, threatening to sweep him off his feet. Hadi grabbed him, steadying him, but even he could not hide the tremor in his voice. "It's the same presence," he said, "the one that created the cloak. It's angry." Back in the palace, Caesar finally spoke, his voice low and urgent. "Queen Cleopatra, if what you say is true, then we are not prepared for this. Nothing we know, nothing we've built can withstand it." Cleopatra did not flinch. She felt the weight of centuries pressing on her shoulders through the cloak. "Then we must become the storm," she said. "Not against it, but with it." The palace shuddered violently again. Outside, the river surged in a wall of water, rising higher against the city's defenses. People screamed, horses neighed, and lightning split the sky so close it illuminated the shadow beneath the water in terrifying detail. The shape was massive, far larger than any crocodile, far more ancient than the city itself. The cloak pressed against her like a living thing, almost guiding her movements. Cleopatra realized that it was not just a protector, it was a communicator, a bridge, and the river creature, whatever it was responding to it. Caesar's hand hovered near her, unsure whether to touch or retreat. "What is it?" he demanded. She met his gaze. "It is the river. It is the cloak. It is history itself waking to demand recognition." Thunder shook the palace again. The wind tore through the halls, scattering papers and cloth. Servants fell to their knees. And then a new sound reached Cleopatra's ears, an echoing, almost melodic call coming from the river. It resonated in the stone walls, through the cloak, through her chest. The inward symbol pulsed sharply against her back. She gasped. The patterns in the scales shifted, forming lines and shapes she had never seen before. They glowed faintly under the stormlight. A language older than hieroglyphs, older than Rome, older than even Egypt itself. Tarek, watching from the riverbank, felt a similar resonance in his chest. His legs shook as he realized that the cloak and the river were connected across the miles, across time, across the storms. And then came the second twist, one neither Cleopatra nor Caesar expected. From the depths of the palace itself, another presence stirred, a shadow detached from the walls, moving independently, silent but deliberate. It was human-shaped but unnatural in its grace, its movements precise, its intent impossible to read. Nephra gasped. The guardians, they were never gone. Cleopatra's eyes widened. She felt the cloak tighten like a pulse against her back, and in that instant she understood. This was not only a test of courage, of power, of rule. It was a test of survival. The river, the cloak, the unseen guardian, the storm, they were all converging. And the real challenge was only just beginning. Caesar took a cautious step back, his eyes flicking between Cleopatra, the river, and the shadow within the palace. This is beyond us, he muttered. Cleopatra's fingers clenched the edges of the cloak. No, she said firmly. It is not beyond us. It is asking something from us. But we have to be ready, or everything we know will be swept away. The storm intensified. Lightning struck closer, and the river's surface erupted in violent spirals. The palace shook. The hidden guardian moved with speed and precision, slipping between pillars and shadows. The cloak shimmered with a strange light, as if calling to the river creature. And in that moment, Cleopatra realized the final truth before the climax. This was no longer just a confrontation between Egypt and Rome. This was a collision of the past and present, of human ambition and ancient will, of secrets buried for centuries and the force that had preserved them. The stakes were higher than she could have imagined. Caesar understood it. Tark understood it. Even Neferu understood it. And yet, no one knew how it would end, or if it could end at all. The river's massive shadow rose fully, revealing teeth and eyes that reflected centuries of forgotten knowledge. The guardian approached with silent precision, and the cloak pulsed against Cleopatra's back with the rhythm of a heartbeat that was not entirely hers. Everything converged: the storm, the cloak, the river, the guardian, and the two rulers caught in the center. And Cleopatra, standing in the eye of the chaos, realized the unimaginable. The story of the cloak, the river, and Egypt itself was about to reach a moment from which there would be no turning back. The world held its breath. The storm raged, and the ancient presence, awakened and fully aware, moved closer to the surface, ready to decide who would survive and who would be swept into history's shadows. Cleopatra's breath came in slow, measured pulls, though inside, a storm raged as fierce as the one outside. The cloak had tightened against her back, almost uncomfortably, as though it were bracing her for what was coming. Each scale felt alive, a pulse traveling through her shoulders, her arms, her chest. She knew now that this was not just a garment. It was a conduit, a living record of power and warning, connecting the past to the present, the river to the palace, the unseen guardian to the cloak itself. Caesar's eyes did not leave her. He had stopped speaking, stopped moving, his mind clearly racing to comprehend what he was witnessing. There had been no man in Rome, no general, no senator, who could have imagined anything like this. The cloak alone should have been a curiosity, an exotic artifact. Yet here it was, alive, and seemingly commanding the world around it. The thunder rolled again, louder this time, and the palace trembled. Cleopatra realized that the walls themselves were not simply stone. They were part of the storm. They vibrated in resonance with the cloak, the river, and the guardian. Even Caesar's presence seemed to pulse in response. Somehow, they were all linked in a way that defied reason. From the river, the massive shadow moved closer. It had risen almost fully out of the water now. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, reflecting lightning in terrifying flashes. Its scales shimmered in the stormlight, sharp and ancient, catching every shadow of the palace above. The city below screamed and ran. Horses bolted, ships strained at their moorings. And yet, the creature did not attack. It watched, it judged, it waited. Cleopatra felt the cloak tighten again, and suddenly, a strange sound resonated in the room. A low, melodic hum that seemed to come from the cloak itself, from the inward symbol pressed against her back. It was not a sound of this world. It carried memory, intention, warning. It seemed to reach across the distance, whispering to the river, to the guardian, and even to Caesar. Caesar moved slightly, a hand lifting instinctively, but then he froze. The cloak had shifted as if to meet him. A faint shimmer ran across its scales, catching the light of the storm, tracing patterns he could not comprehend. For a moment, Caesar saw what Cleopatra had seen, though only fleetingly, a vision of history, of kings and queens, of battles and rulers long gone, all watching from the folds of the cloak. Neferu stepped closer, her voice barely above the wind. Queen Cleopatra, it's choosing. It is choosing now. Cleopatra's eyes narrowed. Choosing what? She asked, though deep inside she knew. The cloak had waited centuries, surviving floods, fires, wars, and conquest. It had preserved itself for this moment. And now, at last, it was making its decision. Below, Tarek stumbled backward as the river erupted in spirals of water. The shape beneath the surface moved faster now, rising higher, its eyes locked toward Alexandria. It was massive beyond comprehension. It exuded awareness, intelligence, power, and yet it did not attack. It simply advanced, as if it were answering a call only it could hear. Hadi grabbed Tarek by the shoulder, steadying him. "It is responding to her," he said, his voice trembling. To the cloak, to Cleopatra. Back in the palace, Cleopatra stepped closer to Caesar. The cloak pulsed stronger against her back, as if urging her forward. She reached out a hand, not to touch him, but to let him know she was part of this, that he must be part of this too. He met her gaze. "If what you say is true," his voice faltered, "then all of Rome, all of Egypt, all of our armies, nothing can stop what comes next." Cleopatra shook her head slowly. "Not stop. Not yet. But we can guide it. We can survive it, if we act together." The palace trembled again. A section of the balcony cracked beneath the wind. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the scene in stark detail. The guardian appeared fully now, moving along the palace walls. It was humanoid in shape, but impossibly fluid. Its eyes glowed faintly. It carried an air of command, like a sentinel who had waited centuries for the right moment to intervene. Caesar's voice dropped. "This guardian, who or what is it?" Cleopatra's fingers clenched the edges of the cloak. "It is older than Rome, older than Egypt. It was here before we were born. It exists to protect, to judge, and to challenge. And now it has awakened." The storm outside intensified. Rain pelted the city, water rushing through the streets, overflowing into alleys. The river's surface churned violently. The creature rose, fully visible now, massive beyond imagination, eyes locked on the palace balcony where Cleopatra and Caesar stood. Its roar, low and resonant, shook the foundations of the city. People screamed and scattered. The cloak pulsed again, stronger this time, almost violently. Cleopatra felt a surge of energy running through her body, not painful, but overwhelming. The inward symbol burned lightly against her back, as if signaling a command, a warning, a choice. Caesar's hand hovered near her again. He seemed torn, fear, awe, and curiosity warring across his face. "Queen Cleopatra, what must we do?" She met his gaze steadily. "We must act together. The cloak does not belong to us alone. It belongs to history, to the river, to whatever force has guarded it for centuries. And it demands balance. The river, the guardian, Rome, Egypt all must be aligned. Otherwise, she did not finish. She did not need to." Outside, the creature moved closer to the palace. The water beneath it boiled and churned as if the river itself were alive, carrying it forward. Tarek and Hadi watched from afar, understanding that what Cleopatra faced was beyond anything they could intervene in. It was a reckoning centuries in the making. The guardian, shadowed and silent, positioned itself between the palace and the advancing creature. Its movements were deliberate, purposeful, protective, but also demanding. It did not bow. It did not speak. It simply waited, a sentinel answering a call that only it understood. Cleopatra felt the cloak tighten again, almost as if it were wrapping itself around her very soul. She understood in that instant. The cloak, the river, the guardian, the storm, they were not separate. They were one. They had existed in this city for centuries, unseen, patient, waiting for the convergence of power, courage, and will. The massive shape in the river surged higher, revealing the full extent of its size. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence. Its roar split the sky again, shaking even Caesar's resolve. He took a step back. The storm, the water, the guardian, the cloak, they were beyond his command. Cleopatra inhaled slowly. The cloak pulsed beneath her hands. The inward symbol pressed insistently against her back. She understood now that the next moments would define more than her reign. They would define history itself. Lightning struck the river. Water exploded upward in a geyser, the massive shape surging toward the palace. The guardian moved as if anticipating every motion, positioning itself strategically along the walls. And the cloak, alive with memory and intent, pressed against Cleopatra with a force that was almost tangible. She met Caesar's eyes, steady and unyielding. "This is not a battle we can fight with armies or swords," she said. "This is a battle of understanding, of recognition, of the ancient power that has waited for this very moment. We must act as one, or all will be lost." The river creature roared again. The guardian raised itself fully, luminous and impossible, an embodiment of the forces that had waited centuries for this alignment. And Cleopatra, standing tall in the cloak, realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration that the storm, the river, the cloak, the guardian, and even Caesar were all threads of the same tapestry. One wrong move, and centuries of history would be destroyed. One hesitation, and Alexandria could fall. One misstep, and the river, the creature, the cloak, the guardian, all would turn against them. Cleopatra's pulse quickened. She felt the cloak tighten again, almost guiding her, almost whispering. The inward symbol glowed faintly beneath the stormlight, signaling not just warning, but action. And in that moment, she understood the true twist. This was not only a test of survival or rule. It was a test of leadership, courage, and trust. Between her and Caesar, between the cloak and the river, between the guardian and the ancient presence beneath the water. One miscalculation, and the world they knew would be forever changed. The storm roared louder. Water splashed against the palace balcony. Lightning illuminated the guardian in full. The river creature surged toward them. The cloak pulsed like a heartbeat that was not her own. And Cleopatra, standing in the eye of this storm, realized with a shiver that the second twist, the awakening of the river, the guardian's return, the cloak's full intent, had escalated everything. The moment of reckoning was not just coming. It was here. Every breath, every heartbeat, every movement carried consequence. Alexandria itself seemed to hold its breath. Caesar's hand hovered, uncertain. Neferu's eyes widened with fear and awe. Tariq and Hadi watched from afar, understanding that history was being written in a way none of them could alter. Cleopatra tightened her grip on the cloak. The inward symbol pulsed. The guardian shifted. The river surged. And the massive presence beneath the water rose, ready to confront the palace, the queen, and the man from Rome. The storm, the cloak, the river, and the guardian all converged on one central truth. The time for waiting was over. The reckoning had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The river's roar echoed across Alexandria. Lightning struck again. The cloak shimmered, pulsing alive. Caesar's breath hitched. Neferu clutched the balcony railing. Cleopatra's eyes burned with determination. And somewhere beneath the raging water, the ancient force moved deliberately, its eyes fixed on the palace, on the queen, on the cloak that had awakened it after centuries of slumber. The next moment would decide everything. The question was, who, or what, would survive? Cleopatra felt the pulse of the cloak beneath her shoulders, stronger now, almost insistent. It seemed to hum with a life of its own, connecting her to the storm, to the river, and to the unseen guardian now fully revealed along the palace walls. Each heartbeat of the cloak echoed in her chest, intertwining with the thunder outside, vibrating through the floor beneath her feet. She realized with sudden clarity that the cloak was not only a protector, it was a guide, a bridge to something ancient, something beyond even her understanding. Caesar took another cautious step forward. His face was pale, his confidence faltering, yet his eyes remained fixed on Cleopatra. "Queen," he said, his voice low, I have faced armies, storms, and treachery, but I have never seen anything like this." Cleopatra's gaze did not waver. "Because this is not a threat from man, Caesar. This is the past itself, awake, demanding recognition, demanding balance." And the cloak, she paused, letting the stormlight catch the scales, is the key to understanding it. The river surged violently, and the massive creature beneath its surface rose higher, fully revealing its immense form. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, intelligent and deliberate, fixed on the palace and its inhabitants. Water churned around it, waves crashing into the harbor and spilling over streets. The city shook under the power of this ancient force. Tarek stumbled along the southern riverbank, gripping Hadi's arm. It's moving faster now," he gasped, his chest heaving. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like it knows exactly where it needs to go." Hadi's eyes were narrow, scanning the river. "It does. It has been waiting centuries, Tarek, watching. And now, the cloak has called it. There is no turning back." Inside the palace, Cleopatra could feel the cloak reacting to the creature, its scales shifting in a rhythmic pattern, glowing faintly with the pulse of the inward symbol. It was as if the cloak were communicating with the river, sending signals that only it could interpret. She realized that she was no longer an observer. She had become an intermediary between two ancient forces, one bound to the river, one bound to the cloak, and she alone stood at the center. Caesar's hand trembled slightly as he reached toward her. "If what you say is true, then how do we stop it?" Cleopatra shook her head slowly. "We do not stop it. We must guide it. We must act in alignment with it, or all of Alexandria, all of Egypt could be destroyed." A deafening roar erupted from the river, shaking the palace walls. The massive creature surged closer, water slamming against the balcony below Cleopatra. The guardian along the walls moved with uncanny speed, positioning itself between the palace and the water, its eyes glowing faintly as it prepared for confrontation. Nefer's voice broke through the chaos. "Queen Cleopatra, the guardian is not just defending the palace. It's waiting for you to act." Cleopatra's fingers gripped the edges of the cloak. She felt the pulse of the inward symbol sharpen, almost like a heartbeat urging her forward. She understood now. The cloak had preserved more than protection. It had preserved judgment. It had preserved authority. And that authority was calling her to make the first move. The storm intensified. Rain lashed against the palace walls, lightning splitting the sky above, illuminating the guardian and the river creature in stark, terrifying detail. Caesar's breath came faster now, and even his resolve as a general faltered under the raw, overwhelming presence of the forces at play. Then, another twist revealed itself. From deep within the palace's ancient chambers, a secondary pulse echoed, a vibration that was different from the cloak, different from the river. It came from the floor beneath Cleopatra's feet. The stone trembled, cracks forming along the marble. The pulse seemed alive, resonating with the storm and the river, responding to the cloak's signal. "The palace itself," Nefer whispered. "It's part of it. The foundation, the walls, everything has been waiting." Cleopatra felt the pulse reverberate through her, the cloak aligning perfectly with the vibrations. She realized that the palace was not simply a structure. It was a vessel, a node connecting the river, the guardian, and the ancient force beneath the water. And now, the convergence was complete. Caesar's voice trembled. "Then this is bigger than either of us. Bigger than Rome, bigger than Egypt. It's history itself." "Yes," Cleopatra said, her voice steady despite the storm. "And history is demanding that we act." The river surged violently again, rising higher against the palace walls. The massive creature fully revealed itself now, scales glinting in the lightning, eyes fixed on Cleopatra, as though seeking recognition, seeking approval, seeking understanding. Its roar split the air, vibrating through the palace and the city below. The guardian shifted, positioning itself more deliberately, as if preparing for a ritual rather than a battle. Cleopatra's cloak pulsed sharply, the inward symbol pressing against her back like a heartbeat of its own. She realized that the cloak, the guardian, and the river creature were all interlinked, and she, standing at the center, had become the fulcrum. Caesar moved closer, cautious but hesitant. "If we do this wrong," he began, voice low. "If we make a mistake." Cleopatra met his eyes, unwavering. "If we make a mistake, the consequences will not be for us alone. The city, the river, the people all will pay the price. But if we succeed, we become part of something larger than either Rome or Egypt, something that transcends time itself." Lightning struck again, closer this time, illuminating the guardian in full, its humanoid shape glowing faintly against the storm. The river creature surged higher, its massive form visible to the city, its eyes locked on Cleopatra. The cloak shimmered with an almost unbearable intensity, pulsing faster, alive with centuries of memory, warning, and intent. Tarek, far to the south, watched in awe and fear. "It's all connected," he whispered to Hadi. "The cloak, the river, the palace, even the storm. It's a network, and Cleopatra is at the center." Hadi nodded slowly. "Yes, and she must act before it decides to act without her." Inside the palace, Cleopatra lifted her head, letting the stormlight strike the cloak fully. She felt the pulse of the inward symbol intensify, guiding her, almost dictating her next move. She knew now that she had to step forward, that the cloak would protect her, that the guardian would follow her lead, that the river creature awaited her signal. The storm reached a fever pitch. Rain pounded the palace, thunder cracked overhead, and the river surged violently, threatening to consume everything in its path. The guardian moved closer, and the cloak pulsed like a living heartbeat, connecting Cleopatra to the river, the palace, the guardian, and Caesar himself. Caesar stepped beside her finally, his hand hovering near hers. "I trust you," he said quietly, the weight of history and danger heavy in his voice. "Show me what must be done." Cleopatra took a deep breath, feeling the cloak tighten against her shoulders, the inward symbol pressing against her back with increasing urgency. The pulse of the palace beneath her, the roar of the river, the presence of the guardian, and the creature rising from the depths all converged into a single, overwhelming reality. She knew, with chilling clarity, that the next move, her move, would determine not only her fate, not only Caesar's, not only the fate of Alexandria, but the course of history itself. The cloak shimmered violently, the scales catching the lightning in dizzying patterns. The inward symbol burned against her back. The guardian shifted, its luminous eyes fixed on her. The river surged, massive and intelligent, ready to act on her command. Cleopatra turned to Caesar, her eyes blazing. "We have no time. Everything is connected. Everything demands alignment. Are you ready?" Caesar swallowed hard, then nodded. "I am." She turned back to the river. The massive shape rose fully, eyes fixed on her. The storm raged around them. The guardian moved into position. The cloak pulsed, almost screaming with centuries of memory. And Cleopatra knew this. One wrong move, one hesitation, and centuries of history, power, and life itself could be lost. She stepped forward. The cloak shifted with her. The inward symbol pulsed. The guardian followed. The river surged. The storm seemed to hold its breath. The reckoning had begun. And Alexandria, the palace, the river, Caesar, and Cleopatra herself were all caught in the eye of an awakening older than memory, older than Rome, older than Egypt itself. The next moment would decide everything, and no one could predict the outcome. Cleopatra felt the cloak pulse violently against her back, and the inward symbol burned hot against her skin, guiding her steps. The storm raged around the palace, lightning illuminating the guardian and the massive river creature, casting shadows that twisted and stretched across the flooded streets below. She lifted her arms, letting the cloak flare around her like living wings, scales catching the light in patterns she could finally understand. Patterns of connection, of balance, of command. The river creature rose higher, its eyes glowing with intelligence, observing her. It seemed to hesitate, as though it had been waiting centuries for this exact moment, for the right person to acknowledge its presence. Cleopatra took a deep breath and spoke, her voice carrying clearly over the roar of the storm. "I see you. I understand you. We are not enemies. We are bound by history, by memory, by the river itself." The cloak pulsed brighter. The guardian moved in alignment with her stance, glowing faintly as it responded to her command. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. Alexandria, the palace, the storm, even Caesar, all caught in the tense electric pause before something monumental shifted. Then the river erupted in a wall of water that rose toward the palace. The massive creature surged forward, but as Cleopatra stepped closer to the edge of the balcony, the cloak flared with blinding intensity. The inward symbol pressed harder, and a beam of light seemed to project from it directly toward the river. The creature halted, its massive eyes reflecting recognition, understanding, even reverence. Caesar's hand hovered near hers, unsure whether to act or simply witness. "Queen, what is happening?" he asked, his voice shaking. "We are aligning," Cleopatra said. "The cloak, the guardian, the river, all of it. They respond to balance, to recognition, to understanding. If we act together, Alexandria survives. If not," her voice trailed, but the threat was clear. The massive river creature let out a deep, resonant roar, the water itself vibrating around them. Cleopatra felt the pulse of the cloak synchronize with the river's rhythm, the guardian's presence, and even Caesar's steadying heartbeat beside her. She lifted her arms fully, and in that instant, the stormlight reflected off the cloak's scales in a dazzling display, as if the ancient force within it had awakened completely. The river creature paused, then slowly, almost reverently, sank back into the waters, spiraling downward as the storm began to ease. Waves receded from the streets. The winds softened. Lightning flashed only sporadically now. The guardian stepped back slightly, its luminous eyes fading to a calm glow. The cloak's pulse slowed, warmth spreading through Cleopatra's body as if the centuries of memory it carried had finally exhaled. Caesar exhaled, relief washing over him, though he remained rigid with awe. You controlled it?" he asked. Cleopatra shook her head slightly, the cloak settling back over her shoulders. "It was never about control," she said. "It was about recognition, about understanding the forces we are part of, not simply the ones we can dominate. History has its guardians. The river has its protector. And the cloak, it is a reminder that power comes with responsibility, not fear." Neferu stepped forward, eyes wide, trembling. "Queen Cleopatra, you have saved the city. You have survived the river's judgment." But just as the storm seemed to fade entirely, a sudden ripple ran through the cloak. The inward symbol burned brightly for a heartbeat, and then, unexpectedly, a whisper echoed in Cleopatra's mind. Not her voice, not Caesar's. Something older, deeper beyond words. "The balance has shifted," it said. Before she could respond, a shadow moved behind the guardian, one she had not noticed before. It was humanoid, but larger, darker, with eyes that glowed faintly like embers. The guardian stepped back, bowing slightly, recognizing the new presence. Cleopatra's heart skipped. She had aligned the cloak, the river, and the guardian, but there was more. Something had been waiting beneath the palace itself, another ancient force, even older than the cloak or the river creature, finally revealing itself. Caesar gripped her arm. What is that?" Cleopatra's voice was steady, though her chest raced. "I do not know yet," she admitted. "But history is never finished, and some forces are patient beyond comprehension." The new shadow moved closer, its presence heavy, almost tangible. The cloak pulsed again, recognizing it, acknowledging it, as if signaling that the work was not complete. Cleopatra realized that the city was safe, for now, but the story of the cloak, of the river, of the guardian, and of the forces older than memory had not ended. She looked at Caesar. "We have won this moment. But the world is filled with ancient forces we do not fully understand. And sometimes, victory is only the beginning of the challenge. The river calmed. The storm dissipated almost entirely. Citizens would soon return to the streets, unaware of the ancient reckoning that had passed above them. But Cleopatra felt the pulse of the cloak, the weight of its memory, and the gaze of the hidden force, reminding her that history was alive and it always demanded respect. The guardian, now still, glanced at her once more, luminous eyes conveying both reverence and caution. Cleopatra understood. The cloak had chosen her, but it had also revealed a truth far larger than her reign, larger than Caesar, larger than Alexandria. The balance she had achieved was only temporary. The forces of history, of rivers, of ancient guardians, were eternal, and they would test the world again. The shadow beneath the palace shifted slightly, unseen by all but Cleopatra, and a faint echo of movement ran through the cloak. She realized then that the cloak had not only been a key, it had been a signal. Something older, something patient, had watched everything unfold, and it was waiting for the next moment, the next reckoning, the next alignment. Cleopatra inhaled, feeling the weight of centuries on her shoulders, the pulse of the cloak settling into a calm rhythm. Caesar remained at her side, silent, awestruck, understanding only partially the enormity of what had transpired. The city of Alexandria had survived the storm, the river's judgment, and the awakening of ancient powers. But Cleopatra knew that her reign, her understanding of the forces she had encountered, and the cloak itself had changed everything. Nothing would ever be the same. And in the quiet after the storm, as the cloak's scales settled and the guardian withdrew into the shadows of the palace walls, Cleopatra felt a final, chilling truth. The river, the cloak, and the hidden forces of history had one last message. Not all victories are final. Not all forces are known. And the next challenge, whatever it may be, was already awakening, patient and unstoppable. She looked at Caesar, at Neferu, at the city before her, and whispered, "This is only the beginning." The cloak shimmered faintly, almost knowingly, as if confirming her words. The river rippled far below, its surface calm, but its depths concealing secrets yet to rise. The guardian's eyes glowed once more, briefly, before fading. And somewhere beneath the palace, the hidden shadow shifted again, reminding her, and all of Alexandria, that history had more to reveal, and no one, not even a queen, could predict its next move. The storm had passed, the immediate danger had been resolved, and yet the city, the river, and the ancient forces surrounding Cleopatra were alive with possibilities. The cloak had proven its power, but its full purpose and the secret force it had awakened remained a mystery. As Cleopatra turned toward the balcony, looking out over the quieted city, she felt the pulse of the cloak once more. It was no longer violent, no longer urgent, but it remained alive, aware, and patient. It had fulfilled its immediate purpose, yet hinted at challenges yet to come. In that quiet moment, the ultimate truth settled over her like a weight. The cloak, the river, and the guardians of history had chosen her not only as protector, but as witness. And the story of ancient power, patience, and unseen forces was far from over. The city slept beneath the calm night sky, unaware of the forces that had risen, judged, and aligned. Cleopatra remained awake, the cloak around her shoulders, knowing that history had shifted forever, and that she had only glimpsed the beginning of what lay ahead. A final ripple ran through the cloak, subtle but undeniable, almost like a heartbeat. Cleopatra's lips curved in a knowing, wary smile. She had survived the storm, guided the forces, and preserved Alexandria. But deep in her chest, she understood the cloak's true message. The world was far older and far stranger than anyone could imagine, and the story was far from finished. The city of Alexandria was quiet now, the storm having passed completely. Rain still lingered in the streets, pooling in reflective puddles that mirrored the palace's flickering torchlight. Cleopatra stood on the balcony, the crocodile-skin cloak settling comfortably around her shoulders, no longer thrumming with urgent energy, but still warm with life. Its scales glinted faintly in the calm night, a reminder of the force it had carried, the centuries it had waited, and the power it had shared with her. Caesar stepped beside her, his armor slick with rain, hair plastered to his forehead. He remained silent for a long moment, taking in the city, the river, and the faint glow that still lingered from the palace walls. "Queen," he finally said, his voice soft, almost reverent, "I do not think any victory I have known compares to what I have seen tonight. Not armies, not strategy, nothing." Cleopatra gave him a small, steady nod. This was never about armies, Caesar. This was about understanding, about recognizing the forces that exist beyond our control and learning how to work with them, not against them. Neferu appeared from the shadows of the palace hallway, her face pale but relieved. "Your courage saved Alexandria," she said. "The river, the guardian, everything responded to you. You've preserved more than just the city tonight. You've preserved balance itself." Cleopatra allowed herself a small exhale, feeling the weight of the cloak's memory ease from her shoulders. She knew now that the cloak had been a tool, a guide, a protector, but also a teacher. The inward symbol that had burned against her back during the storm had shown her something fundamental. True power is not in domination, but in awareness, alignment, and respect for forces greater than oneself. Tarek and Hadi, still watching from the southern riverbank, made their way closer to the palace, their faces reflecting awe and lingering fear. I cannot believe what I just witnessed," Tarek said, voice trembling. The river, the storm, the creature, and the queen, she controlled it all, or at least guided it. Somehow she spoke to it. Hadi nodded, staring at the quieted river. "It is a reminder that the world is older, deeper, and far stranger than we imagine." Cleopatra's actions tonight were not just for Alexandria. They were for history itself. Cleopatra turned back toward the balcony, her eyes tracing the calm river below. The massive creature had vanished beneath the waters, leaving only gentle ripples, as if it had accepted her words, her recognition, and the alignment she had orchestrated. The guardian, luminous and still, retreated into the shadows of the palace, its duty fulfilled for now, though she sensed it would watch over the city as long as it remained. Caesar's hand brushed hers, hesitant but steady. "You are remarkable," he said, "not just for your wisdom or courage, but for understanding that the world is not ours to command entirely. Tonight, I have witnessed the power of respect for forces greater than oneself." Cleopatra smiled faintly. "Power is meaningless without understanding, Caesar. A ruler who cannot see beyond their own ambitions is blind to the currents that shape history. The cloak, the river, the guardian, they are lessons. Lessons of patience, of alignment, and of the responsibility that comes with influence." Neferu stepped closer, her eyes lingering on the cloak. "And will the cloak itself? It has served you well, but will it remain with you?" Cleopatra ran her fingers lightly along the scales. "It is not mine to keep," she said. "It will return to the river, to its purpose. It will awaken again when the world needs guidance, patience, or balance. Tonight, it has chosen to act through me, but its role is larger than any one life, any one city." Tarek and Hadi exchanged a glance. "So this was not just a victory for the queen," Tarek said quietly. "It was a reminder that the past still shapes the present, that some things endure beyond memory, beyond empires, beyond time itself." Cleopatra's eyes softened as she looked across the city she ruled. Alexandria had survived the storm, the river's judgment, and the awakening of ancient forces. The citizens would never know how close they had come to disaster, how closely history had watched, how carefully it had been guided by a queen's courage and understanding. But she knew, and that knowledge would shape the rest of her reign. She turned to Caesar. "The past is not just to be remembered. It is to be understood. And what we have seen tonight, this alignment, this balance, it will guide not just our actions, but those of generations to come. Let it be a reminder. Wisdom, patience, and respect for forces beyond our control are the true marks of leadership. Caesar nodded, still in awe. I will carry this lesson with me, always. The palace, once shaken by the storm and the river's fury, was now calm. Guards and servants would soon begin their rounds again, the city slowly returning to a sense of normalcy. Cleopatra knew that life would resume, yet everything had shifted. The cloak, the river, the guardian, they had left a permanent mark on her understanding of power, responsibility, and history itself. She turned her gaze outward, across the calm Nile and toward the city streets, imagining the citizens walking unaware of the ancient forces that had watched over them. They would never know of the river's intelligence, of the guardian's vigilance, or of the cloak's silent guidance. Yet she felt their presence in every ripple, every shadow, every subtle current of the river. For Cleopatra, the lesson was clear. Leadership was not about conquest, glory, or fear. It was about connection, perception, and alignment with the world around you. Even the most extraordinary forces, like the cloak or the river creature, were not simply obstacles or threats. They were teachers, reminding her of her place in a history that stretched far beyond her own reign. The night grew quiet. Rainwater still shimmered on the streets, the air crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of the Nile and the storm. Cleopatra felt a sense of calm settle over her. The cloak had done its work. The river had been acknowledged. The guardian had fulfilled its duty, and the city had survived. Yet, deep in her mind, she remembered the final ripple of the cloak's pulse, the hint of a presence beneath the palace she had not fully seen, the whisper of something patient, unseen, and eternal. It reminded her that while the immediate danger had passed, the forces of history never rested. They observed, they waited, and they acted when the time was right. Cleopatra drew a slow breath. "We have preserved Alexandria," she said softly. "We have honored the past, but we must remain vigilant. History is alive, and it will continue to test us in ways we cannot yet imagine." Caesar placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Then we face it together," he said, "as allies, as rulers, as witnesses to what lies beyond the ordinary world." She nodded. The cloak rested gently around her, scales cool now, but still alive with memory. The city slept peacefully below, the river flowing quietly, and the guardian had returned to its shadows. For now, the balance had been restored. Cleopatra allowed herself a final, reflective smile. The storm, the river, the guardian, and the cloak had shown her the depth of responsibility, the value of patience, and the true nature of power. Alexandria would thrive because of it. History would remember her not only for her reign, but for the courage and understanding that had guided the city through forces far older and wiser than any human ambition. And as she looked across the calm Nile, the city, and the night sky, she knew that some mysteries would always remain, some forces would always watch, and some lessons would never be complete. But she also knew this. She had met the challenge. She had guided the forces, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever history would bring next. The cloak shimmered faintly one last time, a silent acknowledgement of her courage and understanding. The river flowed, deep and calm. The guardian rested in the shadows, and Cleopatra, standing tall with Caesar at her side, turned to face the future, knowing she had earned her place not just as a queen, but as a keeper of history itself. And somewhere beneath the palace, in the quiet darkness, a faint ripple ran through the ancient stone, reminding her, and all who would follow, that the world is older, deeper, and far stranger than any single life could ever fully comprehend. The night held its breath one final time. Then Alexandria slept, safe for now, with a queen who understood the weight of history, the power of alignment, and the lessons hidden in even the oldest forces. The crocodile-skin cloak had fulfilled its purpose, but its memory, its lesson, and its warning would remain with Cleopatra forever. History had tested her, guided her, and changed her. And the city of Alexandria, under her watch, had survived, not by force alone, but by wisdom, understanding, and the courage to face what even the greatest minds could not comprehend. The night faded. Dawn would come, and Cleopatra, with the cloak resting lightly on her shoulders, would rise to meet it, forever shaped by the forces of the past, the river, and the guardians of history who had quietly, patiently waited for her.